want to welcome you today to Credit Safe USA's webinar. My name is Nathan Kolb, and this week, as always, I get to be your host and go through all of this and have the enjoyment of getting to learn alongside of you. So I'm excited for today. I know we have a great topic planned. I know this is a conclusion of our series and all of this, and you folks are ready for that. But before we jump into anything, I do have to go through just a couple of administrative things before we can actually start in on our topic today. So the first thing is this is a recorded webinar. So if this violates your company's policy on privacy or whatever, if it's a personal thing for you, whatever the case, if you do not want to be on a recorded webinar, please exit now. This is your chance. We're giving you a free pass on it. With this being recorded, for those of you that are staying, you will have a chance to get the recording here in the next couple of days. So it does take a couple of days for this to process, for us to edit it a little bit, do a few things to it. And we will have it on a landing page with a link that we will send you in an email to the email address that you registered for this webinar with. So if you registered for something other than your work email or something, just know it may come to a different one. And it will have not only a link to the landing page and a little message from me, but it also on that landing page have the video, but then any other reference links that we mentioned. So you don't have to write them down, or in the questions, you don't have to ask, hey, what was that link or anything like that. You don't have to worry about that. We're going to take care of that for you. Speaking of the questions, though, we want this to be a discussion. Honestly, this is a panel discussion. It is designed to have questions being asked, not just by me. Sure, I like asking questions. I love being the center of attention. What can I say? But I want you guys to get your questions answered. So there's going to be questions asked to you, and there's going to be questions that you can ask and we will answer, not me, the speakers will answer. And the way you do that is down at the bottom of your screen. There's a little text bubble, 2 text bubbles with Q&A on them. You just write it in there. I already have that open, that dialog box open on my side, and I can see every question that comes through. And I will either send you a quick answer, or I will ask it of our speakers, and we will have your stuff answered. And that's the advantage to being in this live broadcast rather than watching this on a recording. So I think that covers everything that we need to cover in the beginning here. Today, we're going to be talking about credit policy. This is the 4th and final episode on credit policies that we've done. And this one is what we call our practitioners' perspectives. So we've done this on a lot of other series where we talk to people, not just maybe experts in automation or in legalities or what have you, but we talk to the people that are doing this every day, other credit and financial professionals that are doing this daily and have an experience of this, that they can really speak to what's happening currently and not just this one subject area. So I hope you have your questions ready. I'm excited about it. I've got some questions to get us started here in a minute, but let's find out who's speaking today. So that's going to be the best thing. And Ada, why don't you kick us off and just let us know a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much. Very excited to be here. Ada DeMichelle. I'm currently the Director of Credit and Financial Solutions for Ingram Micro Canada. I've been in the credit space for, I'm going to cap it at 23 years. I will say that's it, 23 years. And in 5 years from now, you'll still hear me saying the 23-year mark. Worked for a number of different industries as well as a number of different companies. So one of the things that I love about being in this profession is that every company and every industry is different. And the benefit of having that broad scope is the fact that you can put your imprint within any organization that you work in, especially as it relates to the credit side of things. So that's a little bit about me.
All right. And Ava, what about you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. Nice to be here again, working with you, Nathan, and thanks for the invite. So my first webinar in this series on the credit policy items. So my name is Ava. I'm a solution architect at a company called Sarala, a German-based company working in the software solution space for finance value chain solutions. Prior to that, I've worked in the order-to-cash arena myself for roughly 20 years, also in various organizations in various countries, been in the UK for 16 years. I'm now back in the Netherlands, so evening time for me. Nevertheless, very excited to be here as well, to take some questions, to ask some questions, and yeah, let's kick it off, I think, Nathan.
Right. And so, folks, you can hear we have the descriptions of who's speaking just said we have an international thing going on here. Yes, you are not in the wrong place. This is Credit Safe US. We did do this. I am from the United States, and that's who's hosting this. But you know, we work internationally. We are an international company, and you know, we've got an international panel today. So it actually got us thinking earlier when we were kind of doing the prep of starting off with a question to you guys. And the first question that we're going to ask to you guys, I'm going to get to in 1 second, but at this point, at any point now, start asking your questions. Any questions you have for our panelists, go ahead. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. You can send in your questions to me, and then I will ask it of our panelists. And I have some prep starter questions for them so we can get the discussion going, just so that everybody's kind of on the same page. But our question to you is, first, it's kind of a multi-part question. First thing is your current credit policy an international credit policy? Does it span multiple countries? If it does, how many countries and languages does it span? So again, is it international? If so, yes. If it is, then how many countries and how many languages does your credit policy have to span? You can answer this with your name attached to it. You can tell us what company you're a part of. You can tell us none of that. You can do it anonymously. Doesn't matter. But you can start sending those questions in, or those answers in, through that Q&A section, and asking your questions as I get started here with a couple of questions that we've already pre-done, so that we have something to talk about to start out with here. So Ada, I'm going to start with you. You know, we all know we need a credit policy, right? Like, we've got that. We don't need to belabor that. We don't have it, you know, hammer that in. But how do we do this so that it's not just, you know, the folks in the credit department look at this and that's all we do, nobody else knows about it, and people get annoyed with us when we talk about it? How do we really make this accessible or broaden it to the whole business, so that it becomes a real company policy?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, Nathan, because when you look at credit, you know, traditional credit, you know, the department is, you know, trying to say no, right? We don't want to take this risk or whatnot, but change the conversation and see using credit as a value proposition for the organization, and start socializing that concept. And that's where you're going to start to gain trust from other business units, and really aligning yourself with certainly the sales side of things. I think that's when you're going to start to see that shift, and it'll start to morph into its own integral, I would say, entity, right?
Mm-hmm.
In essence, again, it's changing the conversation. So for an example, you have a customer that wants to grow and expand their business. However, your traditional credit policy is, you know, it's quite tight, and it would limit the amount of credit that you would give them. And that would limit their growth. So starting with the customer in mind, how do you actually help them expand their business? So finding a creative solution, can you connect them with a funder that does XYZ? Can you offer extended terms with, you know, additional security to win over some more business? I think that is when you start as a credit individual in an organization, when you can have the intelligent conversation and say, okay, this is how it's going to impact our P&L. This is the risk for the company, and this is how we're going to hedge that risk, and this is going to be the benefit to the customer. Once you start having those conversations, I think you start building trust, and it just, you know, creates that whole value proposition from a customer perspective and from a company perspective.
That's actually quite interesting. So I have something to add there as well. So you talked about growing your customers, huh? And from my own experience as well, of course, this is not something you do in a few days or a few weeks. So it's something that is going on for a long period of time that needs intense monitoring. And I think what I've learned from my past experience in certain organizations is that we actually did kind of a training on what is credit, what do we actually do. So you can take the key elements from your policy, put it in a nice PowerPoint presentation that isn't too hefty, and introduce it that way. So it's a bit more like what we do here today, questions and answers that will allow people in the organization to ask questions from their perspective of their job. So if they are in an order management function or in a collections, but not together with the credit team, for example, then you can really get some clarity as to what they think it is that credit is and what you actually do as a credit practitioner.
Right.
And you can really clear the air, and then you can build together, right, on supporting a customer and ensuring that they can grow, they can thrive, and you of course have your early risk detections as well if your policy covers this. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, and a question for you guys with this that is kind of is included in all this. One of our previous speakers on one of the other policy setups had said they had a previous company had actually kind of did what you guys are talking about, but then they actually got it with part of the onboarding. So every new employee got what they were doing as part of an onboarding. What do you think about something like that? Do you think that'll help with the overall company, or do you think it's just extraneous, it's too much?
Yeah, so Nathan, I'll take that, and then Eva can add on. That is the number one thing to do. I've done that in many different organizations. Onboarding, especially new sales individuals within the organization, operations folks, so that one, you start to build a relationship, and two, you start to educate, what does the credit organization do, and how do you help mitigate risk and grow business at the same time. And I think that you get a captive audience right then and there.
Right.
Absolutely. No, I think I have very little to add there. I totally agree. I think it's all about teaching, communicating, and it's also because the policy is a living document, right? So it may well change what you've taught a salesperson or any other individual internally a year ago. So it might also be a great opportunity to re-educate the new salespeople, but also the existing ones, if you really have massive changes in your policy, for example.
Right.
So I think it's a great way of interaction within the organization, keep it alive, align, and make sure that you have a common goal.
Yeah.
Eva, to that point where you just said, I love how you said that it's a living document.
Yeah.
As we both know, it's never a once and done type of a situation, right? And wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that here in a little bit. We do have a question here on, what about getting the sales buy-in, not just from hey, this helps the company, but does it help to actually establish your company in the marketplace and minimize your risk at the same time? So can you, by getting the sales folks involved, can this actually help you make your job a little bit easier?
You want to take this?
Sure, yeah.
Nobody wants to touch it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't mind.
Based on my experience in my 20 plus years, I'm going to cap it now at 20.
Oh, we're going to 20 now. Not 23 anymore. 20.
It's not 23. It's going the other way. Based on my experience, when you have that close relationship with sales, it can help one, mitigate risk because they know the customer, and then they can introduce you to the customer. So oftentimes, when you develop that relationship both with on the sales side and directly with the customer, you're open to more information, which helps you, help to grow the customer, or helps you kind of reel back and say, hey, our risk here is way too much, and we need to look at mitigating this in some sort of fashion. So I think it works both ways in terms of knowing your risk. The other part to the question is, can it be a source of a strategic market advantage? I've seen it time and time again, where I know in some businesses, especially the technology in the small medium-sized businesses, offering credit can be a competitive advantage in certain markets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think if you take the credit policy, it can definitely work in your favor, but it can also work against you, I think, in the market. And this is, something, if you make it all too tight and you're very, everything is revolving around your organization and very little for the customer, for example, that can really be off-putting, particularly if they may be already trading with a competitor. They know exactly what the score is with the competitor when it comes to credit trade terms, and they look around in the market to see what else is out there. They do their homework, and they kind of walk into a wall because it's all about them having to provide guarantees, them only having very short payment terms, them having to do this, them having to do that, and they're not actually getting anything in return for their feeling. That might actually be put a barrier for them to decide to either trade with you or trade with you instead of the competitor. So it's also kind of like a ticket that you have to gain business in
Right.
how you put it. On the other hand, of course, if you're too lean, that could also work against you, I guess, because then maybe they feel a bit lost. So there needs to be some form of structure in the document and what your messaging is towards your customer and to the market about your company, your policies, and what you stand for. So,
Well, and Ava, to kind of actually even throw onto that, I mean, this is what you're really talking about is how cash flow is affected by your credit policy. So do you want to speak to that a little bit about how that can happen?
yeah, absolutely. Well, it's like this, right? If you, for example, think about an organization that might not have a credit policy, we actually see this quite a lot in my current job, where we speak with a lot of organizations in the credit space, and they either don't have a policy or it hasn't been updated for a very long time, or there's plenty of reasons why it's not functioning, the credit policy. So that, of course, doesn't help the credit individuals do their job properly. But it has a roll-on effect, again, back to the sales, back to all sorts of other aspects that eventually are going to impact your customer or maybe your reputation in the market, right? And that can drive people away. So you need to be sure that you have a consistent message. If you make changes, it's corresponding with what you are trying to represent as an organization, and that you communicate this. But again, going back to what I just said, if you make it all too tight and it's all about you benefiting from your credit policy, but you're not giving any leeway to your customers, then of course it can also be a reversed impact, which means that your customers might either start to pay late, they may default. If you haven't got it captured properly and you have an understanding with your customer as to how to mitigate risk in such times, then it could really impact your cash flow or your working capital position. So you want to be sure that you have a structured document that is easy to interpret, I think, for both internal and external parties. So you can ensure that your internal people know what to do. So in order to mitigate risk, to stay on top of portfolios, to stay on top of your receivables, those kind of things. Disputes also part of a credit policy often, that they are managed properly and timely. And you don't want to scare your customer off as well either, with strong language. So make sure you have a clear message. Yeah. And make sure that customers engage when things are going wrong. I think that's important there, when they feel that they may have cash flow issues, that is not going to become your problem. So they feel they can come and speak to you. You don't need to chase it all the time, because that will really help you. What Ada said earlier, resolve the issues, mitigate risk, look for solutions, and ultimately keep your own cash flow healthy.
Absolutely. Ada, anything to add to that?
100% agree with everything that Eva said. So not much more to add, except for, I have seen where when you're very close with a customer and you can trade off, I call them trade-off favors, right? They're coming up to a quarter end, they need an extra day or two to make the payment over to you. Authorizing that and having that encapsulated into a policy is helpful for individuals that are working within that organization to say, okay, we're going to offset your payment for one or 2 days to help you get through your quarter end. And then helping us with our quarter end, right? When it comes to your trading that favor. So,
Right.
having that kind of broad language within your policy, that definitely helps working capital in the end, right?
Absolutely. Great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we've got a bunch of the answers coming in here, and I'm actually a little surprised. We have a lot of folks that are working internationally, but it seems like they are only working in English. So they may work in multiple countries, they may ship to a lot of countries, or they may have customers in a lot of countries, but they're English only. It's several of them said English and dollars only, type of thing. So is that normal? Is that what most companies in a particular country, whatever the case, if it's a French company, they're going to work, in euros and in French, US companies are working in dollars and English. Is that pretty common, or is this, how does that go in your experience? Whichever one of you would like to answer.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind having a go. It's actually because I think it's quite funny that you say this, right? Because it's also what I'm used to in my previous organizations. I worked for mainly American companies, funny enough, even though I'm based in Europe. But same thing, it's English language because we assume that globally this is the common trade language. However, being in Europe, and we see this quite a lot. We still have, for example, a American company that may have a shared service center here in Europe or maybe in Asia, in countries where English is maybe not really a standard language, and some of the people actually working on the floor that are not in a senior position but do the daily tasks are not actually that well spoken in English. And the question bears then, do these people actually understand such a policy? Because how do they get the information, right? It's being told to them verbally. And, are they going to be able to look it back up? Probably not. Are they interpreting correctly what they hear? So there is definitely a few things to think about, like how well do my staff actually understand my policies, my company's policies? So I think it's well worth considering maybe if you are operating in specific countries, particularly if you have a shared service center where you have a lot of people together doing all these back office activities, that you ensure that they understand what your company policies are. So maybe it may be worthwhile to put it through a translator or have somebody rewrite it in a different language just to make sure it's available. And of course, it will need to be updated if there are changes to it, but we're never going to rewrite the whole policy in one go. So there will be little bits and bobs here and there. But it's definitely something to think about, because I think the more the message is in somebody's brain, the better they obviously will perform, because they know what to do, but they also know what to do when they don't know what to do, because they know where to reach out. And that's really important.
Yeah, and I think that's key, right? Is how do we know that our individuals that are actually living this policy day to day, their interpretation of it, and making sure that they know exactly what to do. So I'm going to add a Canadian flair to it. We all know Quebec, French-speaking province. And in my experience, I've managed a lot of individuals in that province. I'm from there. I live in Toronto now, but being able to really have the individuals that perhaps don't speak, the common language, translating it into that local language is important. I mean, it costs a few dollars to get that policy translated. I would say it's worth its money in dividends at the end of the day, for them to, also feel included, right? In terms of, yeah, I don't have, my brain doesn't have to work that much harder to understand something, because it's, it's pretty clear in the language that I operate in.
Yeah, and another actually interesting element there as well is like the not understanding, as Ada just explained, that it could actually lead to maybe individuals in the organization doing things that they think are correct, but are not actually compliant at all. And then if you may have legal explanations and you haven't been compliant with your own policy for whatever reason, even if it wasn't with intent, it still cause a lot of issues and obviously then costs you a lot of money if this is, for example, going to court or by any other legal path. So even for that reason, it's a few dollars well spent to consider translating, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a great, a great way to handle it. And I think too, I mean, you even have to think about, like, Ada, you were saying, Canada, you have English and French being spoken throughout the country, but it's a different dialect of French than what you would find in France. I work for, Credit Safe US, our international headquarters are in the UK. Well, that's a different type of English than what we speak here in the US. And quite often they'll send things to us and we have to translate them. We have to know what are you actually talking about here and how can we do it? But we both speak English. So I think there's a lot of truth in that of so that you don't have to work that much harder or guess at what's going on. Because like you're saying, those junior people may not decide to ask the question. Oh yeah, I got it. I know what's going on. And they really don't. They don't even know to ask the question. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. When you're doing that. And would you do that for every country that your company is in, or would you do that just in the major places, or how would you handle that if you're dealing with a lot of different countries?
So I think obviously if you operate with a credit person locally in every country in the world, it's going to be a bit of a tricky thing.
Right.
But yeah, I would definitely again mention many companies these days have shared service centers for a reason, right? To have all these credit and accounting people together in one place. If you operate in that kind of system, then I would definitely recommend doing it there where you have your shared service center. And otherwise I would definitely say, if you are operating in many multiple countries, it's difficult, but to maybe have one language from a specific region, that could be interpreted by all this on the work floor. Yeah, it's a bit difficult if you're really going to look at single countries, I think. Ada, what do you
Yeah,
recommend?
I would agree is like consolidating, Europe. I mean, look at Europe, for example, you have multiple different, languages there, or Asia. What is the most common language used there, and maybe having that translated to that most common language. I think that kind of covers you. To do it for every different language is a little bit tricky, especially if you've got, and it depends on how global the organization is as well, right?
Right.
The large global organizations, like Eva says, we operate in shared services environments, so that makes it a little bit more easy to have those translations into one document that is a common language. But if you've got individuals that are in different countries, that makes it a little bit trickier. I don't have the right answer or the specific answer to that. It's kind of tricky as the world becomes more global, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I
Then
mean,
maybe
again,
the solution is and then provide English course to your employees.
just
And
teach
we're going
everybody
down
the
a
same
whole new
language and we'll
route.
be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
I think you
develop
guys
like
are,
an AI translation tool that you could just pop in that document and
that I think we're not too far from that. So that's going to be there. But I think you guys are making the point too of just, it depends on the company. It depends on the specific market you're going into and how your company operates and things like that, as to how you're going to do that. And I've got a bunch of comments and questions about this, and I'm going to kind of try and synthesize this into one thing. And it's actually close to one of the questions we had as a prep question anyway. Of and Ada, I'm going to throw this to you. How basically, and I guess I'll just use our question because it'll be the easiest. But like, how does a credit policy really help with that relationship and engagement with your customers? You've got them now; they're your customer. How can a credit policy really be used as that relationship builder?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. If you built into the policy that it's flexible enough to allow for growth, And that comes from the organization's appetite for flexibility, right? So going back to what I said is ensuring from an org perspective that there's an appetite, identifying, the potential profit opportunities and hedging the risk against that. I think that when you look at the level of influence that you have as a credit practitioner and having that relationship with your customer, it could give you opportunities within not only the customer's insight, but also that industry or that market that customer is operating in, give you insight into how you could be even more competitive.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that as well, I think it's also, the appetite for risk that is covered in your policy, right? I mean, depending on what you sell and where you sell it, one company may be in a better position to take more risk and be happy
Mhm.
to drive more growth, knowing that there is a risk involved, whereas others may be much more conservative because the impact is way too big if something goes wrong, right? So it's also the nature of the business, the size of the business, and definitely where is the business operating. I think what is the whole supply chain looking like and forwards. So yeah, it's something each business probably would have to really, define for themselves. I think what is that level of flexibility and risk appetite, in combination to serve your customers, but also to serve yourself in a certain level, right? In the end, you want to grow.
Yeah, that's
You
a,
need
a
your customers
very
to grow and be healthy to grow yourself. So,
Yeah, that's a very good point because it also depends, I think, on where you are as a company from a
Mhm.
financial strength, right? So if you're very solid from a financial perspective and you have the appetite to take on a little bit more risk and say, okay, well, we're gonna, place our bets into this certain market and we're gonna open up, a little bit of the credit in this market to gain market share. And we can do that because we have a very strong balance sheet. Our margins are very good. And maybe the margins are even, above average versus any other business unit. So as an organization, you might have that freedom to do that. Conversely, if you're not in a financial position where, you're kind of, your balance sheet's not too strong, your working capital is weak, you might not be as your appetite for risk might not be as great as the other organization. So um, there's your margins, like there's a lot of different
Right.
elements, I think, that go into that question. So really, to Eva's point, is identifying those elements and where your
Mhm.
company is at, to see what your appetite is.
Okay. Okay. Another question here. You've mentioned flexibility several times. How often should I review slash change slash update my credit policy?
okay, shall I take this one?
Yeah,
Right.
whichever one of you would like to. It's a big question, so go
No,
for it.
that's okay. Right. I think first of all, of course, you need to ensure that you have a version of your credit policy that at least has been reviewed in the last 12 months, right? To make sure everything is still aligned with the business goals and all the processes, compliance rules. What we see a lot, again, in what I do today, speaking to all these businesses, is businesses acquiring businesses, businesses disposing of businesses. There's all sorts of stuff going on. There's internal growth requirements. So there's always a lot of movement and changes. And I think, these are not necessarily always captured, even though they may really have an impact on the overall way you conduct your business. And if you change the way you conduct your business, then it's time to review this policy, right? So I would say if it's not really changing. You may want to just at least read it through once a quarter, definitely make maybe some minor changes every 6 months and do a big change every year. But if you're in a very agile environment where there is a lot of things happening, as I just described, and I think it's every time there is a major change, this policy needs to be reviewed and updated. Because if you will be acquiring, disposing, merging, all these kind of things, there will always be changes. And if you don't make the changes, then obviously, people that came with the acquisition, they will just continue the way they knew from before because they haven't been updated.
Right.
And that can really lead to major issues further down the road for various reasons. And ultimately, again, of course, then, have negative impacts on your overall business performance, which is not what
Yeah.
we want.
Yeah, and to your earlier point, it's a living document, right? And
Yeah,
it's,
absolutely.
depending on the industry and whatnot that you're in. I love this question because, just our recent change in the world, right? Look at what we've had to do from a pandemic perspective. We've had to pivot and either like our physical work environment and also some of our business processes, right? So this is really an example of how flexible were you able to be during the pandemic, and were you flexible enough so that you were able to manage through that change? And even within we're still living it. Our policy has changed within it, right? So at the beginning was like, okay, we want to make sure that our risk is mitigated. We don't know what's happening. Back in April 2020, is the world gonna, are the markets gonna collapse? Are all of our customers gonna go bankrupt? We had a different lens on what the future would look like. And then being in the technology space, we had a very different outcome of what we thought was going to happen, which was beneficial. And so we had to work through that. So I think, the living, breathing aspect of it is dead on.
Right.
But I think the two things is that one is that you actually have a working foundation of what a policy is. And then the second one is, making sure you communicate it, like Eva said, to your organization, because, with a lot of M&A activity today, you want to make sure that you're not caught off guard.
Yeah. And a follow-up to that, with all that you guys are saying there, how often is this communicated to the customers? So how often are these changes communicated to the customers?
I think if you make changes that are impacting your customer, then they need to be communicated, right? If they're really going to make an impact in the trade relationship, there's plenty of small changes that are just going to be relevant to the internal processes. But if there's seriously something you're changing because you want to change the way you mitigate risk, or say, for example, you're a business and you never use any securities or collaterals, and all of a sudden, you see all sorts of stuff happening in the world, and you're thinking, I want to get more securities in place, and I'm only going to extend credit after this amount if I get certain collaterals from my customer. That would be significant enough change to notify customers about, right? Saying, okay, anybody that wants a limit higher than this, will have to come up with guarantees or any other form of collaterals. So that could be, for example, a notification you could share with your customer. So I think it's the crucial ones, right? That keep your relationship with your customer healthy, because you've set the expectation. So they have a choice whether they want to then maybe go over that credit limit in the future, or just keep trading on the level where they're at because they're not so comfortable obtaining, or maybe they can't obtain collaterals, right? So they know also how to set their expectations in their business. And this is how it should roll on, right? And this is what Ada said so nicely earlier. Like, it's all about kind of managing also your customer, right? So you allow them to also thrive in the market space, because that's going to benefit you. So it's almost like knowing your customer's customer as well. It's that roll-on effect. And this is why I think the policy is so important, that you have certain standards as an organization that you are open and honest about with your clientele.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ada, what about you? What are your thoughts on that one?
Super well said. I'm not sure I can add anything more to that. Yeah.
That's okay. That's all right. If
But
you
it
don't need
is,
to, that's
Nathan,
okay.
it's all about knowing you're not your customer anymore. You know, you need to know your customer's customer. It's like knowing your cousin from like Australia that you've never met in your life, you know, with through DNA research. You know, it's like this is how it goes these days, right? It's not stopping at your front door anymore. You need to really dig a bit deeper.
Yeah.
Because in the end, it's all going to benefit you. Because you can
Sure.
react and you allow others to react. So it's chain reaction, and yeah, you're part of that chain. So
yeah, 100%. Because when you look at the impact that your customers have on your customers' business, right? You know, they could be at risk with certain markets. So look at the pandemic, right? Companies that are selling into restaurants or into commercial real estate or movie theaters, they've been shut down for a very long time, so their working capital has been impacted, and therefore your customers' working capital has been impacted. So it's like you said, it's a chain reaction, but then it also can serve as a competitive advantage, in the future with helping your customer provide different solutions to their customers.
Sure. Okay, so we do have some time left, folks. We do have some questions here, but we do have a couple, we have some space for a couple questions. So if you do want to get some questions in, please go ahead and pop them now. If you've been waiting for that break, it's probably not going to happen. So just drop those questions in right now. I don't want folks to go away with wishing they had asked a question, but okay, now that I've said that, let's get right back to them. Ava, with all this going on, how does this affect like legalities and everything? I mean, you've talked about all these different implications of cash flow and relationship management and all this type of stuff. I mean, there's a legal aspect to all this too, and we've already talked about languages, different countries, all of that. So there's a lot here. I don't know that we have time to cover all of it. It's probably its own webinar, but let's do an overview on the idea of how this impacts the credit policy impacts the legalities and everything that's going on.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think we touched upon it a little bit earlier in a very quick way. But I think, again, like you have this living document, right, that needs to adapt together with you and your business, including your customers and their customers. So I think it's all about creating that visibility and transparency for your own organization, but also for the broader spectrum, to prevent legality issues, right? I mean, if everybody can work to the right standards and operate with the right communications because the expectations are clear, both internally and externally, then of course the whole point is to mitigate risk with this credit policy and to be able to interfere as soon as you identify that there is a risk of any, defaults or whatever. So I think the first thing is it should be benefit from a legal perspective that you can protect yourself. However, of course, as in any organization, customers do default and end up in litigation. And sometimes a customer may even sue you. And then I think it's really important that you can prove that you've handled accordingly to your own protocol, right? That you've written in this document. Because I think if you can prove this and you can, support that you have followed the rules, you've laid out the rules to the customer, you made it very clear what the expectation from the customer was, whether they've complied with this, yes or no. Have you complied internally with your own policy? Then of course it will make legality issues much easier to handle if, for example, they have to go to court. So this could also really be a useful tool, I think, from internal compliance perspective. I think making sure your internal staff are adhering to this policy, they're understanding it, to protect yourself, but also to cover yourself if it will go to court for legal actions.
Yeah, and to that, I'll add there's, within, at least in Canada, there's two different, you have to be cognizant of local legislation as well, right? So all of Canada, with the exception of Quebec, is on a common law system, and then Quebec has got the civil law system, and then within interprovincial um, uh, areas, there's also different specific legal areas that you have to abide by. So being mindful of knowing what those commonalities and differences are and building that into your policy, I think that's important. So because you can't apply, what works in Ontario might not work in Quebec.
Right.
And also,
right.
I think actually very interesting there is like, because depending on whether the business is doing B2B business or B2C business, right, that consumers have massive protection when it comes to purchasing laws and all these kind of things, at least here in Europe. So that's definitely also something to really look out for, like, who's it that I'm having my legal issue with. And what protections do they have from a law perspective to take that into consideration, because that will be definitely a big hurdle if you're not prepared for that, I think.
Yeah, that's a
You're in
very
that
good
space.
point. Yeah, that's a very good point that you raise, because from a on a consumer's perspective, different protections that they would have, even around access to information, communication,
Absolutely.
when and where you can communicate with them. That's a whole different area of practice as well, right? And
Right.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so we've got time for two more questions that I'm gonna give to you guys here. The first one is, and I'm gonna kind of paraphrase these questions. They're a little bit longer, but you basically we've talked about M&A and different things in the customer's perspective. What about in our own company? How does that affect our credit policy if we're acquired or we're merged or we're split up into 17 different parts and sold off? Or how should that affect our credit policy? And I'm paraphrasing here, but I think I'm getting the point. So,
you want to take
who wants to go for it? Somebody, nobody wants to touch that one. I don't want to talk about it.
Depends what boat you're in, I guess. It depends what boat you're in. I mean, like, yes, if you are being acquired, then obviously you probably will have to follow the lead of the organization acquiring you. If that organization is sensible, then at least they would definitely review the credit policy, so to have an understanding as to how were you operating from a credit perspective and a risk mitigation perspective. And see what parts of these processes are still valuable at this time. I think ultimately, of course, in acquisition over a period of time, a longer period of time, they will merge processes and change everything, but that isn't done overnight. But in the meantime, of course, business continues, and you still need to mitigate that risk. And I think if you are the acquired party, the acquiring party doesn't know these customers. They don't know how well behaved are these customers, how well are these markets maybe operating. So these kind of things, detailed things, they may not really know the ins and outs of. So the bigger picture, of course, yes, because otherwise they wouldn't have acquired you. But I think, the really nitty-gritty stuff on a day-to-day basis, of course, no. So for them, it would be a really good learning curve to understand how you've handled your policy so far. And then maybe also already identify maybe a little bit based on performance of your portfolio, how well have you actually done this? How well have you executed all these things? So yeah, I think that could be one way of looking at it. If they're going to split up your organization, I think the principle remains the same, right? You're going to start changing processes, but I would definitely look at what is the most sensible to adopt immediately, right? Because you need to continue doing the day-to-day work, and then keep working on an ongoing basis to see what needs improving in the short term, what needs improving medium term, and what can we leave for later in the year, whatever.
Sure.
But really, be picky about it, right?
Yeah, and I don't mean to cut you off here, but I do want to get this last question in.
Sure.
Ada, I'm going to throw it to you to start out with, and it's a little bit more of an involved question. I'm going to try and cut down the big section here, but this person's asking, I'm in a very small company. We rely on third-party data or just third-party information about credit limits, but they don't give us much data or reports or anything. They just kind of give us the limit. How do you recommend presenting the need to improve the credit policies to include better data, credit reports, other things with credit risk management, specifically to owners who are exceptionally cautious about any additional expenses? And I mean, the answer obviously is you fire whoever you're using and you hire CreditSafe. But what else can you say to them? I mean, that's the answer. We already know that. But who how can you do that? And yes, whoever wrote that, you did this anonymously. Please send me an email. I promise you we can help you out. But like, what are some things that somebody can do this? A lot of companies are dealing with this, where you don't want to spend money on this, but you're not doing the right things.
So I will use the word imagine. Imagine you knew that a customer you're going into has not paid your competitor for X amount of months, and that information is sitting right now on a report. How can that have helped you mitigate the risk? What would you do with that information? So to answer that question, I think one of the things that needs to happen is to build a business case, and not to say to the owners, okay, well, we need this because, we bad debt and all that, but you can use it from two aspects. One is to really determine the appetite for risk of the owners, and it'll guide you into making certain decisions. But also, hey, we have an opportunity here to really learn about our customers and see, is there any additional services that we can offer, right? I mean, that's more on the latter side, but I would just say, use the word imagine. The customer has not paid a competitor in the last X months, and that's data that's sitting on a credit report that you wouldn't have otherwise known about. I think that's the most simplistic way of me.
Sure.
And I think in addition to that as well, I'll keep it very brief. I think it's also seriously a value add to tell management, right, that it's worth investing in decent data like CreditSafe. And
Thank you.
but you can actually start comparing your customers in your portfolio, right, and really the performance, because that is also a really good indicator of where your risk is really lying. If you haven't got that visibility, then it's going to come and bite you eventually, and that's going to cost you a lot more than spending some dollars or whatever it is on proper credit data from an agency. So it's also really about portfolio management.
That's a good point. And really identifying the key vendor that you're going to use and helping you getting as many data points to make that decision, right? Exactly. Perhaps they've used a different credit reporting agency that really didn't do anything for them, but using a vendor like I use CreditSafe and various other vendors, but
we'll forgive you for that.
Yeah.
We expect folks to use multiple vendors, and you really should, folks. Just because we're CreditSafe doesn't mean we don't think you should. So
but making sure that you get that robust picture, I think, is the key message that what I'm trying to get across.
Great stuff. Well, ladies, thank you so much. We have come to the end of our time here. It's always a good time having both of you on. I'm glad to have had both of you back. And for all of you that have been here, have you enjoyed the whole series, all that type of stuff, we thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your questions. We really do want to create a community here of credit and finance professionals that can learn and grow together and all get better together. And as always, you can go to creditsafe.com/webinars anytime. Check out all of our upcoming webinars. We have more individual webinars coming up, as well as a new series coming up in September. We're very excited about. So check those out. Sign up for our mailing list so you know what's going on, and check out our social media so you have that. If you want to connect with any of our speakers, you can go to the webinars page and just click on their name, and it'll take you to their LinkedIn bio, and you can connect with them there. And again, you'll be getting a follow-up email from me about this. But again, ladies, thank you. Folks, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Thank you, Ada.
Everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Emma.
Have a great day. Thank you.